All right. So as we get ready to get organized here, I'm sure you're gathering your thoughts and everything you need. I will say this: it is good to be home, even if it's only for what 36 hours. If you
I
divide
I
10 into
can't see
12.
you, by the way.
No, can't see me yet.
I just realized, yeah.
That's okay. Hopefully, I'll pop up here sooner than later. I can see you. You're
Okay.
talking about on the actual camera or
Yeah,
Facebook?
on the Skype cam, but I just got your Facebook live.
Yep. Well, that's the main one there. Who knows? As I'm sure it's trying to make its way through. But anyhow, so welcome back. I know we've been extremely busy. We love doing these. I've actually really missed it. And Wendy, you've missed nothing. It's true. Well, maybe for the most part. Nelson, what's up? What's going on? Let me go ahead and that was for Jeremy. Well, so hey, just so you know, so three topics we're talking about. And by the way, we are going to keep it like heavily strict in an hour. One, I don't want to get you in trouble with your wife, Jeremy, but since I just got in town and I know it's been so crazy with work, like we really have to stick to it.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, those three topics in particular. So we'll be talking about obviously El Paso, what went down with that, and then some interesting fallout with Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, and what the UK is actually doing about that, which I think will be extremely interesting. And then last but not least, we will finish up with conspiracy. I always want to do Epstein. Put sometimes a terrible German accent, but Epstein. Not sure exactly how to pronounce it, Jeffrey. But anyway, so let's go ahead and hop right in. So specifically, I know we've been really busy. It's been really crazy, but I mean, what is going on? I mean, this whole El Paso situation.
Yeah.
Here we go again.
It's another horrible time in America where a mass shooting happens, and add on a few more pieces to the puzzle where you've got white supremacy involved.
Okay.
You've got the factor of somebody who is very clearly with an anti-immigrant approach to life, taking violence and taking action through violence, and 22 people, I think, last count, are no longer in this world because of it. So it's not a good situation by any stretch of the imagination. It's one of the most significant, I think, I mean, it's horrible to say, but one of the most significant mass shootings that I've been alive for, simply because it really does highlight something that we all talk about and we all
Hmm.
vocalize on a regular basis, especially on this show. So, and then to turn around the next morning and see nine more people killed in another mass shooting, unrelated to the same sort of motivation. But it's a tough time to look back on things and sort of figure out what's going on.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, so did he leave a? I believe that's like some sort of manifesto or something like that. Whatever, like a little letter behind. I forget what they call it. I think it was on it.
Yeah, the El Paso shooter left a manifesto, and it was very specifically regarding immigrants. He quoted the Mexican invasion of America. Um, he, I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind that he went to that Walmart on that Saturday morning targeting brown people. And he went to a border town where, much like, in the Canadian border, people will travel into the United States to buy things that they can't buy in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Um, People will travel from Mexico into the United States to buy things that they can't buy in Mexico. And so this Walmart was probably full of Mexican nationals, full of Mexican immigrants, full of Mexican citizens, and also American citizens. And um, there was a very clear motivation here, and you can read the manifesto, and see no disparity in what's being reported in the media versus what's actually true. And I think even the
Can you get
shooter,
can you get
in
an
his own
example, by the
words,
way?
would contribute to that.
So I don't know if you pulled something up, but like a specific example, I think would be necessary here. And it's one of those two where like you know you don't want to give people like that credit or that limelight for doing something like this because I'm not sure exactly what all the motivation entails to be doing so, especially these type of heinous acts. But nonetheless, it's also something like we shouldn't avoid talking about either, right? Like I mean, it's really terrible if it's considered to be like a part of our everyday norm, right? I mean, I kind of, I hear about it and I'm like, oh, well, here we go again. Like, just another shooting. Like, and it's becoming a thing. I mean, I've never thought, just ever, that I would think about, okay, if I go somewhere, like, what's my exit strategy? Where would I go? Or I even find myself, like, sometimes there's certain events happening and I'm like, do I really want to go there? Right? Like, could it be excessively dangerous? Is it worth it? And I mean, is that the type? It seems like that's the type of place that the type of world that we're really living in now. I mean, it just, to me, it's just crazy. Like, I can't believe this is still a topic that we're really talking about. And look, I'm not saying that anybody's just going to come through, sign one stroke of the pen, and then everything's going to change, and there's just going to be, zero violence or whatnot. Like, we're living in a perfect world, that's for sure. But at the same time, it just, we're clearly not doing anything about it. And I'm like, okay, what does it take for us to be like, okay, enough already? Like, this has gone too far. I mean, this has been going on ever since I can remember, from me finishing high school, since Columbine, right? Like, in that era, that was the major one I lived through, and now it's almost like yeah, okay, well, it happens every year.
Yeah, I mean, Virginia Tech, Columbine, those were some of the more significant ones in a public setting, and also a little bit further in time. It wasn't as recent as these last batch, which has been once a year. It seems like for the last 5 years or so, and they're never. I mean, they're always significant. And I remember when Columbine was I was a kid, but 13 people was incredible to me. It was so terrifying that I had to go to school after all of this that I'm seeing about what happened at a school in Colorado. And again, Virginia Tech was 30 something, and we had Sutherland Springs here in Texas that was last year, 2 years ago, that was 28, I believe. And it's just more and more and more. These are not only common, but they're getting worse and worse, and we're getting less and less concerned about them, it seems, as a nation. We can pretend that this is a shock and that this is something that we're going to turn around and do something about. But the most common thing that I've seen about this is that if nothing changed after Sandy Hook, when almost 20 children were murdered at their elementary school, then what could possibly change? And I tend to agree with some of those voices. I agree with some people who think that Vegas was significant in the sense that you had a guy who compiled an arsenal and brought it through the doors and the hallways of a very crowded casino up into the room where he kind of prepared for an attack for days. He prepared for an attack, and when that attack was carried out, it was carried out swiftly. And if it were not for a security guard and a maintenance worker, we might be talking about the worst mass shooting the world has ever seen. But because of that, we're talking about the worst mass shooting the U.S. has ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, look,
but would anything ever change? I don't know. I'm not sure what we're waiting on to change something. I'm not sure what has to happen for us to understand that this doesn't happen anywhere else.
Well, here, I'll add this to it. Look, Nelson said, "Yep, I think of it, happening at the gym, right?" So when he's there, that crosses his mind. And let's just be honest. None of this is really going to change unless the people in power lose a son or daughter, right? I mean, let's just get real with it. Like, if these people haven't changed it by now, it's because they haven't lost somebody that they love. And it's unfortunate that that's what people have to do, because, again, exercising empathy seems to be a real challenge these days, which is really unfortunate. And I think it's just going to really take a new generation to really get it right, because here we're way too attached. Like, we're never going to get over saying, okay, what is it worth? Is it worth, whether it's lack of education, which is likely a combination of all these things, right? Lack of education. I didn't really like how the administration tried to blame excessive video games, like violence in video games, because no, Eric, I disagree with that. Never budge on a second. No, I think you do have to reiterate and make some changes here. I don't think you can completely do that. I'm going to go silent for a second.
That's not on my end. Oh, the joys of parenthood.
Well, yeah, that's it. Like, I will come off mute for a second, but Eric, I'm going to disagree with you. Gun control. We do have to get something in control. Like this, what's out of control is the mass shootings, like point blank, period. And you can try to list all these cities and whatnot. Like, what about Chicago? Like, any place that you go where the hood is there, that's going to do it. Yeah, there's been a recent shooting in California. There's been a lot of those. I'm trying to understand how there are other countries that why do they not have the issue, even though we have some of the same things that happen here, right? So, like, prime example. I mean, people are people, and so when I see, let's say, like, video game violence, you got a lot of video game culture in Japan, but they don't have the same type of structure. So, no, I think we're too attached to our guns. Like, we got to move on here. It's one of those, like, I get it, you like them or whatnot, but it's not worth the cost to me. You don't have to budge on it. That's fine. But an inch and take a mile. No, like, we got to get up with the times. That's fear right there. I'm sorry, I'll never budge. Give it an inch, they'll take a mile. No,
Hey,
I think that
hey,
you're
Terrence,
going to have to budge. There's going to have to be compromise.
let me ask Eric, since you're commenting here, just quickly, where in the Second Amendment does it talk about guns anywhere? Is that something that I'm missing, or does it talk about an armament, right? Arms, which is all kinds of weapons. It's various. It's an arsenal. It's not specific to muskets. It's not specific to handguns. It's not specific to rifles. It's specific to militarized weapons, right? So if that's the case, then why would it be legal for, why not make it legal for anybody to just carry a bomb, wherever they go, or to, have any restrictions on weapons at all, on anything that can be used as a weapon or a form of harm, anything at all. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, right? It's all about the right to bear arms, right? So what does that mean? It means the right to bear armaments, the right to have a weapon, to have any sort of. It's so that the government cannot be the most, the government from the revolutionary times cannot be the most militarized form of government when we had the revolutionary soldiers who were trying to defend it. So that was why the Second Amendment came into place. So now, if that's the logic, is that we're still supposed to be more militarized than our government, then why spend so much money on our government? Why spend so much time putting laws in place that keep dangerous things out of the hands of citizens? Right? At what point does that line get crossed? At what point does that become an issue where we now have to admit that, okay, people can't have bombs in their luggage and just hanging out waiting for any time they might need it. They can't have biological warfare. They can't have certain types of knives or certain types of guns that have certain fire rates. So if there's restrictions on those kinds of things and that's okay at this point, then why stop there? Why do we have to just say that's enough? You can't do anything else. There's clearly already restrictions on the Second Amendment, right? You can't tell me that there's just anybody can have any weapon they want. So if that isn't something that happens right now, then why would we stop there? That's my question. We're not Venezuela, man. Like this is platitudes. It's all platitudes. You have to actually have some concrete results to bear some sort of reason for change. And what we've seen a lot of results of not having gun restrictions. We've seen a lot of violence come from the fact that there are so many people in this country who don't want to do harm with weapons, but there's just enough people where it has to happen because it happens far too often.
Yeah,
right. And you use Chicago as an example, and Chicago as an example is one that I find kind of ironic because number one, there's two things at play here. Number one, there's gang violence, there's drugs. These are not necessarily what you would call innocent civilians who are under fire a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are, it's bystander fire. It's not sort of just out at a concert, out at a movie theater, out at Walmart. Mm-hmm. This is not the same thing. And when you use gun control arguments about Chicago, look at the statistics. 99% of the guns that are used in violence in Chicago are obtained in Indiana because Indiana has no gun control. So this argument about Chicago, Indiana is 4 hours away from Chicago. You could go watch Drugs Inc. on Netflix and you'll see a whole story dedicated to a whole of Chicago drug trade, dedicated to the fact that Indiana is the number one source of guns for the Chicago gang wars. So again, these platitudes don't hold up any water when you've got kids that are dying in Walmart, when you've got kids that are growing up without families. These need to change. This conversation has to escalate to a point where we can no longer say that this is acceptable. And I'm not saying that there needs to be take away all the guns. I don't think anybody's saying that. But there was a assault weapons ban that was passed several years ago, and shootings went down. And when that weapons ban expired, then shootings went back up, and that's not by accident, right? Explain to me why Vegas is allowed to happen. Explain to me why Sandy Hook's allowed to happen. Explain to me why, this guy in Dayton, Ohio, went to Texas to an online retailer, and he just bought a gun from a guy in Texas online, and then took that gun into, took it to where a gun shop and in Ohio and got it registered in his name. That's less work than I would have to do if I bought a car from a guy online. How is this okay?
Yeah, I guess I look at it this way. Like, the irrational fear, like Eric mentioned, like, oh, you got to keep your governments in check. Look, no civilian weapons are going to keep our government in check. Like, let's get real with that. This is not like the old days in the British colonial times where we're both fighting muskets with muskets. Like, I don't know. That to me, that's a big fallacy right there. I mean, if they really want to get you and you're afraid of big government like that, look, they're going to get you anyway. And we love to know about Vegas. It's conspiracy. Look, I don't co-sign on conspiracies at all. I mean, look, we're gonna get to some of that a little bit, where even our president, tweets crazy ass, conspiracy. So that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But nonetheless, I mean, it's like, look, one way or another, you got to work towards a solution. And to tell me that, just any sort of laws or restriction doesn't work, to me, that's a lazy way. Like, I'm not buying it. No, you figure out a way. Like, clearly there's a problem. And I'm not just trying to say, hey, guns are the issue, right? Because I don't think you can just narrow it down to one source. It's a combination of things. But to behave as if we don't have a gun focused type of society is also a bit concerning, because we do. Like, we're just truly obsessed with it. Again, it's like, I'm using you, Eric, as an example. You say you won't budge. That means you won't even say, okay, wait a minute. We do have a problem. We do need to look it over. And I agree with Lee Miller, and I believe somebody else piped up as well. Sorry that I didn't catch you, but Jonathan Wood, actually. Where, look, you got to have gun reform. Like, it's overdue a time. It's overdue a time. And until it happens to you, it's just easy to turn around and say those things. So we can go all of that, Michigan has unregistered whatever. You put up the sheer fact that citizens can hold them accountable for. No, it's like, look, colored people get pulled over by the police all the time. And even if you had a gun, you're not going to hold them accountable for it. You're not going to stop them for it. You can't even deal with the police that way, let alone a government. So I don't get that. Rich, we do not prosecute the laws that are on the books. Look at in why in early 2000 violent crimes went down without passing a single law. And so let's say you hop into that. So what is it about it that you can do? And when it comes to prosecution, this is the problem. Prosecution, like what happened in Texas, is what is called terrorism. And there's nothing you can do there because they're willing to give up their own lives for it. So I think prosecution, that doesn't mean anything. That's like, again, were you going to say that you would prosecute any sort of other terrorist if to them the way to go is to the grave? Like, that just doesn't matter. That's not something, that's not a deterrent. Fighting firepower with firepower, that's not a deterrent. When people are willing, again, to go in and cause mass murders, knowing that there's a high probability they're going to die and probably what they want, just not going to do it. And I'm with you, Jonathan. Hey, look, I like shooting, but I love my family more. Absolutely. And there has to be some sort of revisitation to the issue. There has to be. And to sit here and pretend that we're not going to budge or whatnot, this is not going to fly. So I would say prepare to be upset, because I think that time is long overdue and is certainly coming, especially as the younger generation is getting more vocal. They'll be involved in politics. And Eric, don't start with the whole liberal channel sort of situation. And I know you're just kidding, but let's not kid there on that one, because like, for me, politics is politics. I don't put them either sort of way, but that's the exact type of conversation that gets people not to talk and gets them riled up and not thinking. And we Americans are getting a bad rep, and we're doing it to ourselves, where we're not thinking about things. We're just spewing and going off of emotion. I think that's a dangerous place to go. And Jonathan, I'm with you. Liberal. Exactly. I know a lot of people that love guns and are responsible owners that would also agree, look, you got to address this. It's getting out of control. It just is. Facts is, look how many people keep getting shot up.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at, and again, I got a lot of comments here about my facts and my opinions, and largely a lot of what I said was my
Mhm.
opinion. I didn't state any facts, and I certainly didn't try and exact any statistics. I was making generalizations, and I apologize if that wasn't clear. My point, though, is that there's a lot of people, most people in this country have said that they would rather have some common sense gun legislation. So we have to start somewhere. Like at the end of the day, that's all it comes down to.
Yeah, that's it. Like
If
nobody's.
if you have a place where if you have a map of the entire world and you look at where the gun violence comes from, 90% of the time it's going to come from the United States. And also, if you look at a map, you say, where are most of the guns in the world? A lot of them are in the United States. Violent video games, not the same thing, right? Mental illness, not the same thing. That exists everywhere in the world. There are so many things you could point to that said this is why these things happen, and the only constant is that mass shootings are coexistent with places where guns are so heavily owned. And it's not a matter of, people who have them not having the right to have them. It's about making it smart. It's about the fact that I cannot drive a car or own a car unless I have insurance, unless I have registration. I'm not allowed to get behind the wheel of a vehicle because it's dangerous. Because if I do something that causes harm, then I need to be held accountable. That same logic doesn't exist with guns. And that's one of the reasons why it's so easy in this country. Again, Chicago is the example, to go and buy guns in Indiana, bring them back to Chicago, kill a bunch of people, and then not have any consequences for it. Right? It's crazy. If anybody on this channel said that they wouldn't submit to having their guns registered and having something associated to them, I would be concerned for that person. I would be concerned being around that person, because that tells me that they've got some motivation to hide what they're doing, that it's not just for protection, that it's for some sinister motive, whether it's, an emergency situation where the government is involved, which again, we've lived in this country for a long time and never once had to face that. And pretty sure at this point, the president of the United States is one of the last people that you're too worried about, and his Justice Department. So all of this aside, like all of these platitudes don't help anything, especially when you start bringing left and right into it. This should not be a partisan issue. This is, Terrence, your point earlier. It's not about their kids getting killed. It's not about these lawmakers and their families being affected by it. It's about their pockets. It's about the fact that the NRA exists inside of every single person. Every mass shooting in this country is a commercial for the NRA. And so the more of these things that happen, the more money that they're going to make. And it's that simple. So they're going to do everything they possibly can not to continue allowing these things to happen. Of course, that's an insane statement, but they're certainly not going to make it harder, right? And that is fundamentally, that's one of the problems with this country when it comes to political finance, when it comes to making sure that there's some reform in this election campaign and this cycle, where we can make sure that people who are being elected based on merit and not based on who can pay the most at whoever's expense.
Yeah,
That's all it comes down to.
And here, let's pause for a second because we have to move on here soon. But it's like, look, I see a lot of people like Traves. I'm with you, right? Like he's like, so in my, in your opinions, how do we address it? I personally don't want to give up my firearms. And look, I think there's a lot of people that way, and I don't think it's easy to address it. But that's why we have to have that discussion. And I just think, again, Eric, I'm going at you here. People who don't want to budge, I just think that's not the answer. Like, there's going to have to be movement, and if it's going to cause a big, situation, and people are going to get upset, then people are going to get upset about it. But the time has come. We got to make some sort of moves on it. And this is just my thought. Like, okay, let's say you're going to keep them. Okay, fine. But start making people responsible. Like, I think these things do need to be registered. It does need to be tied to somebody. And let's say if yours, for whatever reason, gets sold, illegally, gets on the market, whatever it is, I think the person who owns it should be held responsible for it as well. So let's say if your gun is causing some sort of mass shooting and it was yours, I think you should pay the price for it as well. And that may seem harsh, but I'm like, look, I'm sorry. And by the way, Eric, it's not just mental illness. There's a lot of people with mental illness that's not going around shooting up people, right? But it's also access. And I think that's the key. It's all these ingredients together. Like, no one's going to ever say guns are the only issue. And to Trey's point, you're right. Criminals won't necessarily give up their guns. But this is where I think that, again, we have police for a reason. We have people that are, like, it's like, unless somebody tries to enter my home, which if that's the particular case, right, like, I can have a firearm and that's totally okay, but what's acceptable, what's not, how much of it you should have. I mean, those are things that people just don't necessarily want to talk about, but I think the time is just coming. It's going to have to be talked about, and it's not going to go away until we do something about it. But nonetheless, I'll give Trey's the last one. He said a responsible owner always registers, and when you sell, you have documentation. I agree, but we also have a lot of irresponsible owners, hence how the mentally ill, as Eric likes to put them, get a hold of it. And again, I'm not saying that's all the same thing. And Eric Smith has put, I live in Chicago. People crossing state lines to get guns point out the need for federal laws, not leaving this up to the states. And I agree. I don't think this should be a state matter. I think this should be a federal matter at that point and go through. And you're right. You're right, Eric. It is our opinion, but opinions ultimately is what causes change. And people to get together in mass numbers is a democracy, and we move on. So
Yeah.
speaking of
Yeah.
moving on,
Let me get one more
look,
point.
you got to do it in 60 seconds or less. Because
I got you. I got you. So at the end of the day, there's a lot that can be done when it comes to common sense gun laws. It's not a matter of if they would work or whatever. It doesn't matter. This is not to try and stop all gun violence. This is to make it harder for bad guys to get guns. For the people who do these horrible things, is to make it harder for them. And if you're worried about any laws passing because it might make it less convenient for you to just go online and buy a gun, to just go into, the supermarket and buy a gun, or to go to a gun show, go behind the building and buy a gun. If these are the things that you're concerned about, then you're not part of the solution. Right? This is common sense gun legislation is not for you. It's not to stop you. It's not to give you any trouble with buying guns. It's so that bad people cannot get guns as easy as they can get right now. It's so that things like Vegas would never happen again, where a guy who had no criminal background, who had no history of mental illness, stockpiled thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition,
all right, so
dozens of guns, hundreds of guns in a hotel room, rain down fire on a crowded concert. These things can't happen. That's what common sense gun legislation is all about.
And there we go. And no, Rich, we didn't fight a war over guns. No, we fought a war instead over our freedom of opinion, taxation without representation. And by the way, yes, cars kill people, hammers kill people, but cars, hammers, hippos, they're not designed to kill people. That's just sometimes what happens. Guns, they're designed to kill people and defend. So with that, time to move on. Yeah, you can hang out in here. This is going to happen. All right, so Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Yep. Hold on, buddy. This is going to continue to happen. But I'm going to go on mute for a second here. Hey, when I'm home, I'm home. So the last one is specifically Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. So the UK's crackdown on toxic online content will soon mean fines, restrictions, or suspensions for tech companies that fail to take action. So let me just give you a little bit of idea of what this is. And I'm curious to see or to hear what you guys think about it. So Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube could face huge fines for failing to remove toxic online videos as part of a crackdown by the UK government on harmful social media content. And the government said on Monday that under new rules due to be introduced next year, tech companies will have to pay up to 5% of their revenue or even face restriction or suspension of services if they fail to remove content. So my question that I'll pose to everyone here is, all right, when it comes to this sort of thing, do we feel that it's time that the government does have to actually regulate social media because they're just not assuming or taking responsibility?
It's tough, though, because this is not just our government, where we have very specific standards to what is art and, well, less specific standards to what is considered art and what's freedom of expression versus UK government or Canadian government or Australian government, where these things are more restrictive. And so I think what it comes down to is more of the fact that there's a responsibility on the part of the people who are allowing this content to exist, that they need to be policing it themselves and they need to be more responsible for it. And if the government of a country needs to get involved because a United States website based website is causing children to see these violent images or these horrible things, then that's a different conversation. That should be more of a conversation about what can we do as a government to require companies that are based out of the United States who offer services in the United and around the world to be more specific about these things and to be more in tune with the government and their laws.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's like, look, a lot of these tech companies, they're not really taking responsibility the way they should. And I think that's the thing, right? It's like they want to reap all the benefits and all the rewards, but assume no responsibility, right? And so, like, Mark Zuckerberg, like, I'm looking right at him on this one, right? Like, he wants to pretend he has, like, no power and can't do anything about it. But at the same time, I'm like, well, it is your company. You do get to have a say in it. And I found it very interesting. Like, first and foremost, it's like, okay, here we go again. Like, why is the UK leading with this, right? Like, I feel like we should lead with this. Like, they had to do, so much already with just online responsibility. And I feel like we're really lagging behind this in the United States. But maybe a counterpoint is, the president now wants to, for whatever reason, he believes like he feels that conservatives aren't getting a fair shake on social media, which I don't know what he's talking about because he gets to break the terms and conditions of Twitter every day if they let him be on. So, it's like, look, the time has come where there's going to have something's going to have to be done regarding the content that's up there, and we're just not getting it up there quick enough. And I appreciate what these tech companies are doing because, like, even like this, right? Like what we're doing now, we're able to do because these tech companies allow things to go live. And mind you, like we're just two civil people trying to have a conversation with everybody else. But there's unfortunately people out there that do abuse that, right? And I remember like who is it? It's like a ninja. He switched over to Microsoft's platform from Twitch, and all of a sudden, like they were showing porn and other adult content that was on there. And this is again, you're just looking at like when will these companies finally get it together and say, hey, we do want to have these platforms, but we are going to have to take a stance on how we regulate it, right? Because freedom of speech does not transfer to these tech companies, meaning tech companies can decide what's on their platform and not on their platform. Like right now, I can choose what comment goes up or doesn't go up, right? And, if somebody thinks, oh, I should be able to say, whatever I want, even within your channel, it's like, well, no, like this is my real estate. This is my digital real estate, right? My area. And so, just like you have certain channels, I mean, everybody's a little bit biased. Let's just get that out there. Whether it's, CNN, the Fox News, whomever, like people are going to have their biases. I'm just very surprised that it's taking, a foreign government to step in to get us here in the States to start making sure that these tech companies are held, to high regard of you got to make sure what content goes out. Right, like in other words, like you got to be very careful. You can't let things like violence slip out, or like I saw one where like a dude's trying to jump from one platform to another, fell like over 100 feet and just splatted to his death. I'm like, yeah, I didn't want to see that. Right, like I did not want to see that at all. It reminded me of what was that old? It's like Rotten.com. I don't know if anybody remembers that from like the late '90s. Right,
That
it was
was
like
a
terrible.
that's
Like
a
if
throwback.
you want to go there and you want to see it, that's fine. But like I guess like on a real public square type of place, like do you want to see it? I don't know. They got to get that together.
Yeah, and again, we had this conversation one of our first episodes that we did when we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
the content streamers or the screeners and what they check for on social media, specifically on Facebook, and the conditions that they work in and the types of people that they choose to do this. I mean, this is a serious thing. It's not something that can be taken lightly. It's if you can accidentally stumble across a video like you just referenced, then there's probably something that needs to be done. And I don't want my government to be taking time to police Facebook. I think that's a little bit excessive, and I certainly don't want that because I have lots of friends and families in other countries and continents around the world who shouldn't be relying on the American government to police Facebook either. This is a situation where Facebook needs to take ownership, and the other social media needs to take ownership. And yeah, there does need to be more of a standard, I think, set on just these social media platforms and what is and isn't approved, but on a very very specific basis, on the basis of violent imagery,
Well, look what Ty said.
pornography, the big ones that really make a difference to somebody who accidentally seeing them. The types of things that they will screen on Facebook. There's already standards for it.
There is. I mean,
But if
look
you
what
if you
Ty
talk
said.
about
Right, kind of bringing his thought. Right, he says, sadly, and I think what he means is, but what he would deem violent is what some others consider safe or whatnot. It's all relative. And I mean, he has a point, right? I mean, that's what makes it so tough to regulate to begin with, because what's acceptable, let's say in our country, isn't acceptable elsewhere. I mean, look at right now. I think it's like Google, YouTube, in particular, like Russia, right? They don't want them showing certain material anymore. I know they had some riots there. They had some riots and protests in China, whatnot, and they want to heavily regulate that. And it's different in every country. And this is where things are going to get really tough and dicey because unlike like let's say the state of Georgia, right, or state of Texas, like you can try to regulate that state in which people live, but when you live somewhere online in a digital space, the thing is that's more of an international affair. That's just not a U.S. situation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Ty's point is a very good point because it's a relative situation. It's what you might find offensive, or like there just has to be some broad lines painted, and then choose what to allow from a consumer perspective. So if you and I are both on Facebook, and you think that something is more, I guess, graphic than I would, then you can choose to screen that, or you can choose to put that as your preference, and to keep your children from having that, or to keep your it's I mean there's only it's all brainstorming at this point, because there's no real standard for it. We're still at the age where this is now in its infancy, where social media as around the clock, 24/7, you can look at anything at any time.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the evolutionary cycle of technology, it's still pretty young. So there still needs to be a lot fleshed out and figured out when it comes to that kind of thing. But yeah, Ty's point is a really good one. It's not specific to how I feel. It's more specific to a standard that's set into place. So I think that standard still needs to be set, though. I don't think you can still just go about it and say, well, if they see it, they see it, and it's up to them to decide whether it's offensive or not. Because then you've got kids who are watching, pornography or people dying on Facebook,
Yeah.
and that's not an option either.
Well, the conversation picked up in the UK in 2017 after the suicide of the 14-year-old girl Molly Russell, who she
Yeah.
was using Instagram to view self-image or self-harming imagery, right? And so at some point, like, you have to look and be like, okay, like, what should, what is deemable, right? Like, if this is a platform, again, because this is not necessarily like a government ran thing, I'm looking at it as what's appropriate to be shown and what's not, and I think that's completely up to the social media network to do it. And I don't know if, like, this is a slight, like, the UK flexing on these social media companies to say, okay, if you don't get this in order, I'm gonna go and or we're gonna go and we're gonna regulate it for you. And I think that is so interesting to me.
Yeah, it makes me think back to when I was in, when this was really young, and the
Mm-hmm.
internet was still sort of coming into its own, not just for social media, but in general. I saw probably some of the worst videos I've ever seen around that time, because it was still such a new idea. And it was talked about in school. It was talked about that, there was this video of this person who did this really horrible thing. There was this video of this kid who did a really horrible thing on camera. And so kids would immediately, decide whether they want to see it or not, and then they would go and watch it, and then they would, have the effects of that. It wasn't something that as an adult we have the ability to say, like, this is not something I want to see. If you told me, yeah, there's this really horrible video that's out there, I can be like, no thanks, T, I'm good. But as a kid, your curiosity kind of gets the better of you in some cases. So, this specific one in the UK, I don't think it's the UK flexing. I think this is a major issue, and it has been for a very long time. Whenever, especially considering that teen suicide is up so high in the last several years, and it's so, for lack of a better term, glorified in a lot of ways by certain aspects of social media, and in a way that's dangerous to teens that are feeling like,
Mm-hmm.
that there's depression, or that there's mental illness in their future. So yeah, I don't think there's anything to be taken lightly here. It's a major thing, and again, content creators also have to be taking a little bit of blame here to make sure that they're being allowed to post this, but they're the ones that are making the conscious decision to post it for whatever reason. And anybody who shares that video is making the conscious decision. So it goes to several levels of blame, or several shares of mea culpa, to say that this is not something that can be changed overnight. But there still needs to be something put into place that starts to make it a little bit more user
Yeah,
managed.
there's no doubt there, and and it's one of those. It's like, look, I get it. Like, the social media thing is going to be certainly tough to tackle, right? And I'm very slow. Like, I like, even Eric brought up an interesting point, specifically about okay, so you ban violence, porn, etc., and he says it's common sense, but you don't ban because you have a different view than you. But that's where it gets dicey, right? Again, to Ty's point, well, my view of violence may be different than your view of violence. Porn. If you think of come on, was it Tumblr? Tumblr was like rampant with it, right? And in the moment that I think Verizon bought them, I'm not sure. No, Yahoo. Well, Yahoo, whatever. So they got purchased, and then when they went and started filtering out and getting rid of a lot of it, they just lost all these users, right? And so it gets dicey, because it's like, let's say I say, okay, that's acceptable. on those merits, but then is it acceptable if somebody has some sort of like, racial empowerment movement where some sort of, supremacist, regardless of race, that wants to get together and spew some hate, right? Do you take that down? Do you leave it up? And this is where a lot of that stuff really, really, really gets very difficult. And so it's just going to take it's cat's tails all against me. That's something that's, to your point, look, it's still new. It's going to be fleshed out, and we're going to have to give it some time here. So I'm going to, I think Theodore popped in. I'm going to read his as the last one. And then we'll move on. Oh gosh, did you blow the ears? I see you.
He found
I
you.
can hear you. Oh yeah, like I can't get upset when I'm home. I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna try to do it, and hey, it is what it is. So here's Theodore's thoughts here. I'm just gonna share it with everybody, and then we got to move on. So he says thoughts of me, an inexperienced person, of the topic. Similar to the endorsements, such as a license on CDL, etc. It creates access based on such training, practice, and so on and so forth. Would that be a fair sort of similar assessment to have and endorsed? Okay, so he's going back to the weapon side. So I'm going to skip to the social media. For social media, is data privacy and inclusive or personal privacy? Of course, there's loads of positive and negative content, but ultimately it's our choice to either post, condone, condemn, or even block content we don't like. But that's the law of attraction. It becomes more prevalent, more we become reactive to it than proactive. And like I can see some of his points there. That's for sure. But I think
That's the
again,
big challenge, isn't it? Like
what's that?
that's the big challenge here.
Yeah.
When I say social media content is still in its infancy, these types of things, like that's a really great point, Theodore. It's a major paradox because you can start to restrict content, and then that makes that content more valuable, which makes it more accessible. So it's a major catch-22. There's not a whole lot that you're going to be able to do based on the regulations or the restrictions that are in there now, and it's going to take some real some confidence from the manufacturers or from the hosters of these sites and these social media providers to be able to say this is something that we have to eliminate or we have to be on top of. So it's a great point, and it really highlights the issue.
And so, without further ado, we're going to move on to the last topic here because we're going to keep it at an hour. So, okay, hold on. This Epstein situation, what is going on? Like, let me just give you a quick little recount, right? Like, I've been working in New York, like, kind of on and off for the past, 10, 11 days. I can't even keep up with it anymore. I'm only home for a brief moment. But what I thought was very interesting was when I was walking by, like, there's the Fox building there, news station, whatever. And it's like, conspiracy, right? And I went through over and over and over. And I'm like, okay, wait, what is going on with this thing, right? Like, okay, we got to get the facts for it. That's for sure, right? But when I start hearing like people like, "Oh, Trump killed him" or "Clinton killed him," I'm like, "Wait a minute, what is going on?" Like to me, that seems crazy, right? Like, look, I think the president of the United States is absolutely crazy, but I don't think he's going to go and say kill somebody that way. And then to throw it back on the Clintons, like, oh God, here we go. Like, America, have we lost our shit? Like, this is crazy. What is going on with that? Can you shed some context?
Well, so it's a very strange circumstance. First and foremost, I think it's something that hasn't been talked about enough, and unfortunately, the reality is that Jeffrey Epstein and his death signifies that a lot of victims aren't going to be able to face the person that did some horrible things to them. So my heart does go out to them. And the fact that this is all overshadowed by so many conspiracy theories, it's unfortunate because there really is an issue here with the fact that these victims aren't going to be able to stand against their accused, and they're not going to be able to seek that justice unless they see this as justice, which I can't really, I don't know if I can get behind. So that being said, making sure to comment on that. The conspiracy theories on this are running wild, and I'm not typically a conspiracy theorist per se. I'm not one that would jump into the first thought, which is that the Clintons did it or that Trump is somehow involved. Because there are a lot of people who stood to lose a lot if Jeffrey Epstein did make public some of the things that he knew, have any evidence about the things that are being suggested. Certainly the Clintons with Bill Clinton and his trips on what they call the Lolita Express, the Jeffrey Epstein's private plane, and how he was not truthful about that at first. And so there's a reason, there's suspicion as to why he wasn't truthful about this specifically. But then also going back to 2016 when a lawsuit was brought up by a 13-year-old victim that said that Donald Trump was involved with Jeffrey Epstein and his group of people raping her and brutally raping her. And so there's a couple of different avenues. Whatever side of the aisle you want to be on in this conversation, you can say that this is a conspiracy theory, which is why it's so accepted widely. A real issue here, and one of the things that I think needs to be highlighted, is that this prison system is just allowed somebody who is very clearly on suicide watch to commit suicide. And he wasn't on suicide watch at the time,
which is
but he
weird.
was taken off of suicide watch, right? William Barr saying there's very irregularities. I would submit that there's not any irregularities. I think that this is pretty standard practice. But the reason that this is so highlighted is because of how much conspiracy can be associated with it. Now, you might say that's a cop-out because there's so many things that you could, there's so many reasons why he should have been kept alive. But when you look at it from a prisoner's perspective or from a law enforcement perspective, that's not really their focus. They're not looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this MCC, Manhattan Corrections, they said we were understaffed that night. The people who were working that night were totally overtime. They were already working past the time that they were supposed to. Yes, there are some inconsistencies with why Jeffrey Epstein was taken off of suicide watch and why his cellmate was removed. These could be because there's a massive conspiracy in play, or this could be because there's a lot of times that this happens that nobody says anything because it's not involving billionaires. So there's a lot of different avenues you can go down. I'm not sure, nobody knows what happened. There are no facts around it. But the fact that there is one fact is that the first thing that happened was this story was misreported. And there were details like Jeffrey Epstein was on suicide watch when he got killed. So how can somebody on suicide watch get killed? That there was so many specifics about, then they started bringing back the list of people that the Clintons have killed, which is already proven to be false. So many things that can be brought up from this, and really it just takes away from the point, takes away from the fact that something happened. And so we really get into a discussion that's not based on facts. It's more based around theories and thoughts.
Yeah, that's just it. Like, you can go conspiracy theorist all day, like with everything. Why you didn't get a job? Conspiracy theory, right? They just wanted to hire somebody else, and this interview was a sham or whatever. Like, and I, not to necessarily make light of the issue per se, but what a point that you do bring up is like, look, when it involves people with massive amounts of money and billionaires, and it does get a little bit dicey for sure. And look, I can see it both ways, right? Like, okay, let's say somebody was secretly involved, right? They'd want to take him out in case he was going to cop a plea or deal, which, by the way, he could have done back in Florida, because this is not the first time he was arrested for this. This happened back in Florida when he lived there, and the state of New York got him. And there was also, some talks about there being double jeopardy. Like, this one was a little bit different, but that was a concern originally. And so, I could totally see as well why he would want to just, move on, I guess, in life, to put it as sensitively as possible. But, to what I don't like, right? And I know, sorry, Eric, I'm going to go for your favorite person in the whole wide world. Look, Trump shouldn't be tweeting conspiracies. He's the president of the United States, right? Like, he needs to wait for facts and whatnot, and not to start jumping out there. Like, don't blow it up and gaslight it. You know what I'm saying? Like, let it play out, let it go through. When the facts come out, then you speak on it. But to turn around and go down a conspiracy line, I mean, that's where we get to like this hysteria of nobody trusting anything at any given time. And that is a very dangerous place to live in a digital world these days. And I just thought it was extremely irresponsible of him.
Yeah, it's amazing that the president of the United States basically tweeted, and we know that when the president tweets, it's official record, it's presidential record, tweeted a conspiracy theory that a former president and a former presidential candidate was involved in murder conspiracy. That's a crazy statement. When you think about just how crazy everything is now, it's not really that crazy, because you kind of suspected that kind of thing would happen. But just take that 8 years ago, that would be insane. That would be the news. And now it's just, yep, Trump said something else. He tweeted something else. He shared something else. Now, granted, it wasn't his own words, and that's important to point out that it wasn't something that he said or created or content that he created. It was something that he saw on Twitter. He thought, this is funny, this is entertaining, this is important, whatever. But anytime Trump tweets anything, it's in support, or it's an endorsement of that, because it is presidential record in the United States. And I agree with you. I think he should be more responsible with that. But This is my shocked face that
Yeah,
the president's not
and by the
responsible
way,
with his social media account.
and then Eric over here, he said high powered people wanted him dead, right? Epstein drops, go read them. Look, like no, no. There's not a this is real situation, like this has got to really play out here because there's a lot of assumptions. Like I already kind of read a few of them, and there's some stretches. Now it's not to say that it's possible, it is, but this is why both sides blame the news, and you can't do that, right? Like you can't turn around and put something out prematurely. You need to let the jury can't be out on this. They got to be in. You got to put it through. It's got to be fact, and then it goes out. When people start mixing truth with opinions, but it's not very clear on what one or the other is, that's where things get dicey. And right now,
Yeah.
we're just not living in a time where we seem to really respect fact and truth. We're very okay with putting in opinions or insinuating some sort of action. And for me, and again, just me personally, I'm more on the way of science. Absolutely not. Like I cannot subscribe to that. It's no. And then SV docs were open the day before his death. Go educate yourself. No, Eric, whatever. I'm going to wait for this autopsy, some of these facts to come out, and then we'll start making some sort of moves.
So, I mean, Terrence, your point was really, it's a valuable point you just made, which is fact and opinion are two words that get thrown around all the time, right? Opinions can almost never be fact, or opinions can never be fact. It's the opposite. And facts yet sometimes are always shared as opinions in this culture, in this climate. I was told in this thread 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, that I was stating facts while I was listing opinions, and that I needed to get the facts right. And I was also educated on several facts that were certainly opinions. And now I'm being told that the facts are listed on 4chan. I mean, like this kind of thing it's crazy talk. There's no facts in this yet. There's a lot of opinions that have come from a lot of different sources, a lot of places of information, but it's not something that you can take as fact, right? The same person is telling me that the Las Vegas shooter was some conspiracy as well, right? Like, you can make conspiracy theories all day long. There's people who still think that Bush did 9/11. There's people who still think that, we never landed on the moon, that whatever. These people will never stop perpetuating this opinion of theirs, right? But it's not fact. There's nothing factual about it.
No, and
I'm not saying that it's
4chan.
fact other way. I'm not saying that that's guaranteed, but it's not a fact. Regardless of what you want to say about it, it's not fact. And we need to be very, very clear on what we define as fact when we're talking about these kinds of things. Because the fact is that the president of the United States retweeted a tweet that essentially insinuated that a former presidential candidate and a former president were covering up a murder. That's a fact. That's a terrifying fact. That's not significant.
Yeah.
We're more focused on the fact that documents came out on 4chan the day before. Give me a break.
No, definitely not 4chan. And look again. I would have to go. Like I have to verify source upon source upon source because, like, look, these days, especially, I mean, anybody can submit anything on 4chan, right? It's just like Wikipedia. Like a college would not accept Wikipedia as a source for obvious reasons. For it can be open to interpretation and edits. And so, like, I hear what you're trying to say, but like, I just can't believe everything on the internet. I'll go take a look, but from everything that I've heard, again, waiting for autopsy, waiting for some facts, because autopsy is going to give you some insight that you're not going to get elsewhere, right? Because sure, you can have whatever documents you want to believe or whatever. And again, Eric, like, I hear your point, but I'm going to need to see the autopsy results and then all the information that goes with them. And don't worry, like, I will be reading things.
Terrence, hang on one second. So these unsealed documents that you keep referencing in the comments, what about them has anything to do with his death? Where does it say in the unsealed documents, I was killed by the Clintons? That's the point here. That's the fact that's trying to be put out there, is that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered by the Clintons in some sort of cover-up conspiracy, and that there's no chance that anything else is possible. And you're saying go check the documents for that. That's not possible. Those two things can't coexist together. You're talking about documents that say, yes, a lot of powerful people would benefit from him being dead. I said that off the top of the show. I said that as soon as we started talking about it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who seem to think that this was very significant and very convenient for a lot of people. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't prove anything. There's no facts that can be made here because there's no actual investigation that's been done yet. The autopsy isn't even complete yet. So while he's still laying there, we're trying to figure out what happened. We're trying to say, okay, well, the Clintons are involved with it because they're also involved in 24 other people who they already were. It was already proven that they didn't have anything to do with right? Like these memes, this information, this Russian hacking just created this entire stream of crap in the general election back in 2016, and it's coming back out. And you want to tell me about facts? Come on, man.
Well, I would say this, right? Wait a minute. The Clintons are like the most unsuccessful, I guess, gangster people in the world, right? They can get all these people murdered. They can rig all these different things, even rig an election, but they actually can't win an election. Like, oh, okay, okay. On that note, I'm just like, okay, whatever. But oh, and then Jonathan Woods, right? Like, he just wanted to be the first. Of course, well, I think again, Trump just typically likes to be in the forefront of everything. Like everything has to be evolved around him. I mean, the guy couldn't even go to a 9/11 discussion about treatment and medical options for the rest of their lives that we were trying to get past, and yet this guy has to somehow try to make himself sound like a paramedic and make a joke about it. I'm like, oh God, for Christ's sake, you weren't there. Whatever. So it's just going to be so interesting. But yeah, we're going to have to wait for the rest of this to roll out. So I mean, it certainly I can see again where it definitely looks a bit questionable. But I guess like everything else, more of us Americans just losing our shit. We can't keep it together. Like can't separate facts from everything else and be patient. Like everyone's gonna have their thoughts. Everyone's gonna have their opinions about it. But it has to be within reason. And you gotta wait. You gotta sometimes kind of hold your tongue or make sure again if you're a person of power that you don't go spreading that. So.
And T, one last thought here on
Mm-hmm.
that. Donald Trump is a name that came up in Jeffrey Epstein's past a lot, and they were friends at one point.
Yeah.
And most recently, in 2016, before the election, there was an actual trial on the books
Mm-hmm.
that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were involved as co-conspirators in a brutal rape of a 13-year-old girl. And I just want to point out that I've heard more about the Clintons and their involvement with Jeffrey Epstein and their involvement with his death than I have about the president of the United States, who 3 years ago was involved in a trial where this was mentioned. Because there's one group of people who are waiting for the information, and there's one group who's jumping to it. And I'm not going to say that it's all of those people. I'm not going to say it's anybody on one side or the other. My point is, at some point, you just have to wait. And if there's any evidence that the Clintons are involved in this whatsoever, that come out as fact, or anything that actually happens that says that there's actually factual evidence or proof that the Clintons were involved in cover-up of conspiracy of Jeffrey Epstein, including his death, I will condemn all of them. I've condemned them nonstop since the minute any of this started coming out. Since the minute Bill Clinton was involved with the Lolita Express, I started to say, why do I not know about this? Why do we not know what's going on with this? We need to wait for more information. But if it comes out that Donald Trump was involved with anything with Jeffrey Epstein and you're quiet, I'm definitely holding you to the fire on that one.
Well, you know how it goes. This man knows he can shoot people on Fifth Avenue and still not lose voters. So that's usually the difference I see between, and hey, guys, just take this as a great assault. It is what it is between Democrats and Republicans. Like Democrats will definitely throw one another under the bus. If it's not right, they'll call it out. Where the other side, it just seems everything just goes these days. So we'll see. It's going to be really interesting. And I'm with Jonathan on this one. Look, Bill Clinton is a scumbag. Hillary stays married to this scumbag. They're awful people, and yeah, it's just terrible. But hey, look, if it gets exposed as it should, then let it play out as it should, and nobody should make any excuses for them, regardless of your political affiliations. And that's just it. People need to be more tied and have more responsibility to what is right than any sort of ideal or political affiliation. And to sum it up before I pass it on here to let you have any final word, that's exactly what's wrong with us now. This is too much high school, right? Oh, your team Clinton, your team Obama, your team Trump, your team whomever. And I mean, this is crazy. And there's only one thing that remains. It's like, look, there's truth, there's facts. People are going to make mistakes, right? We got to own up to it. You got to hold people accountable when they're not doing the right thing. When they are doing the right thing, you also got to, to make sure you give credit where it's due as well. And it just seems like we have lost that as a nation that's supposed to be sensible here. And then to Jonathan's point, they have no morals or ethics. Yeah, there's really any of them. None of them have had to seem to have any sort of morals or ethics, and that's exactly what's wrong. And the problem is, just like any other leader, like if you have a CEO that has no moral, no ethics, says, "Hey, spend all the money you want, party, you can do drugs, drop the F bomb at work, is totally cool. What do you think people down below are going to start doing? And we're a very tribal society. And so we'll start to do those exact same things. So it's going to be interesting to see here. And then, of course, Larry here, regardless, Trump or Clinton, let them own it. That's just the point, right? You did it, you own it. And for people who, let's say, if you're Clinton lovers, right, no excuses. And for God's sake, for those of you that seem to, Trump can't do anything wrong. If those facts do come out and he gets caught up in some shit, don't be making excuses for it either. But anyways, I'll leave it at that. So Jonathan, Jeremy. I keep seeing Jonathan name everywhere. Jonathan, we're so glad you returned and give a lot of constructive feedback and add some commentary. But Jeremy, anything else you'd add?
Yeah, I want to add one thing, and it's totally unrelated to anything we talked about.
Ooh.
I had a friend who shared something on Facebook, and I wanted to just highlight it and make sure that I talked about it just for a
Mm-hmm.
few seconds. The Humane Society of North Texas is a organization that's very near and dear to people that I'm friends with, and although I haven't had a chance to work with them, any humane society in any community is important, and they do great work. I saw a report that said that there was more cats and dogs being dropped off on a daily basis than was being adopted in a week. So it's important to highlight that if you are in the market for a pet, adopt, don't shop. Go to these humane societies, check it out, see what kind of options are there before you make your selection to go and buy an animal. This does not just go for the North Texas Humane Society. This is all over the country, all over America. It's a very important issue. Cats and dogs don't deserve to die because humans decide that they want to change their mind, and we can do everything possible to stop them. We should. I will share the link in the comments. Ter- Parents, we have lost you.
No, you didn't. You didn't fully lose me there. I was actually just muted because.
Oh, gotcha.
So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go back and mute it.
You
Well,
go be with your family, man. Happy to be
I
home,
had it
right?
automatically with loud noise. But on that note, I'm just gonna turn that over. No, basically what I was saying is so funny. Like a conference call is on mute. It is so true. Crickets, crickets, y'all. No, what I was saying before that mute button stepped in, my kid stepped in. No, it's just one of those. You look at human evolution, right? And people don't evolve very well. People don't like change. They're very resistant to it. We've seen it a lot throughout this conversation. That's just people in general. And yet, when you think about like your kids, everybody wants to make sure they have a better life, that they're better supported, that they have everything that's accessible to them. And it's interesting to me because it made me start to think like, this is why, like, as sad as it is, like, death and whatnot has to really happen to a whole generation of people to get change. Because I think at some point, when you look at history, I don't think history is going to be kind to us. And I think they're going to look at us as we're going to have a very pivotal step as we made this whole leap into the digital world. We're going to more of a global economy, not just an individual one. And people are going to look back and use us as examples in a sense of what not to do or where things can really go wrong because technology and the rest, like the world in general, evolved so quickly that individuals couldn't catch up to those. And so, again, generations die off. People make those changes later as long as nobody hits the nuclear red button and blows everything up. And they'll look back on the textbooks and be, well, what could we have learned from the 21st century? And I think that'll just be it. Anyway.
Yeah, very good closing remarks. I'm not gonna try and top that.
Oh, that's all I got, y'all. Well, and I know we're right at 1 hour and 40 minutes. We did pretty well here. We did pretty well. So on that note, we will catch you all again. Like Jeremy, I don't know your next availability, but we'll work something out. You know how
We'll
it
figure it out.
goes. We'll figure it out. But appreciate you all being around, and we'll talk to you in a bit.